Hello, and welcome to the Argyle HR Leadership Forum, Next Gen Innovation for HR Leaders. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. Throughout today's event, you will also have the opportunity to win one of several prizes. So be sure to check out the prizes and raffle rules tab of the interface to see how you can earn points. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Geoffrey Peterson, Vice President, Data and Analytics, Alight Solutions. We're super excited to have Geoffrey with us for a keynote presentation titled AI and the Employee Experience, Separating Fact from Fiction, featuring Alight Solutions. Welcome, Geoffrey. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it. Great to be here, and thanks everyone for listening in. For today, we'll talk through a variety of topics that'll sort of culminate a bit in talking through fact versus fiction on AI and the HR employee experience. To give a rough sense for agenda, I'll start out with a brief intro on myself, as well as talking about how do we define AI and what are some of these common myths that exist today and how AI is being applied to the HR experience. We'll talk a bit about common use cases for AI and HR. So as you're crafting your HR AI strategies, you sort of know the set of options available or what the rough playing field looks like. We'll then talk a bit about what we're seeing being discussed in terms of good versus great AI capabilities within that. And we'll double click into some of what we're seeing on the Gen AI space. And then lastly, we'll close out with a framework for how to be a successful AI intrapreneur and come back to some of those myths that we covered off in the beginning. And then we'll save you a few minutes at the end for any questions that you have. So a lot of content in today's discussion. I'll try not to talk too fast to try to get it all in, and look forward also to seeing questions coming in that we'll again try to address at the end. So if we go to the next slide, I'll start out by just giving a brief intro on myself. Again, my name is Geoffrey. At Alight Solutions, I look after our AI, our personalization, and some of our analytic capabilities. By way of background, I've loved sort of large-scale data and AI systems for a long time, was at Bloomberg for quite a few years looking after the teams that ingested all the pricing data coming in globally, 20 billion texts a day from various thousands of contributors, using AI to normalize and quality control that data. And most recently was at a startup that built personalization systems for Fortune 500 companies. We built one large consumer goods company's personalization system that produced between 200 and 300 million incremental gross profit every year. And I joined Alight a year ago, really had the chance to use AI for good, right? So getting the chance to improve employees' well-being, improving employee experience at scale in the workplace was incredibly exciting, and haven't been disappointed so far. So that's why I joined Alight. It's sort of a bit about my background. If we go to the next slide, we'll cover off a little bit what are some of the sort of AI myths I think that are there and that we often end up talking with our clients about, and helping educate them and sort of inform their AI strategies. So a couple of these are sort of higher level, a bit more abstract, right? Like AI will completely replace human workers and HR professionals. AI decision-making ends up being a black box. You don't understand what it's doing. Employee data is not secure. If we're using AI to process it, to understand it, to make decisions off of it, AI can be bias-free. There are some folks that are going around and saying are bias-free AI engines. We'll talk about that. And the last myth, and this one is one that probably causes a lot of strain for our clients and the folks that we work with, is I need to service lots of AI use cases. I'm being pressured to service a lot to be successful here. I have to have lots of ways that we're using AI and generative AI and the employee experience in order to be successful. It is a myth, I promise. And as we go through the discussion today, hopefully folks will come out feeling armed with the tools they need to dispel these myths and to be effective AI entrepreneurs within their HR function. If we go to the next slide, I'll just cover off quickly a little bit, who is Alight, what is Alight for folks that are unaware so that you know where our perspective comes from. So Alight, we are an HR solutions provider for large Fortune 500 companies by and large. So things like benefits administration, health, 401k, pension, healthcare navigation services, leaves administration services, payroll, managing workday systems, right? So we provide both technology as well as services across all those different HR domains. So we have a very broad portfolio of HR solutions that we administer through our Alight Work Life platform that's served through our Alight Work Life employee experience platform. And we operate at a pretty large scale, right? So we serve large Fortune 500 companies. We have about 40 million lives for whose benefit we administer. And so our perspective is very much informed by serving very large, complicated clients at very large scales. And also because we're not just the technology, but also the services provider, we stick around, right? We don't just we can't drop software in someone's lap and leave. We're accountable for the results because we're there on the journey. And so that also sort of puts a high bar on the quality of the AI implementations that we bring to our clients. Not just because they're large, sophisticated employers, but also because we're there for the journey by the nature of our business. If you go to the next slide, I'll also cover off quickly like when we say AI, what are we talking about here, right? So what's important to differentiate here is AI is a sort of a loose term. It ranges from more complicated, sophisticated systems that might use machine learning to automatically learn and update beliefs about the world, to more basic predictions, right? So basic regression models, for example, that maybe are only updated monthly or annually. And it also includes some newer techniques or techniques that are useful more recently, like generative AI or large language models. So all of those things are AI. And we sort of consider them as part of AI discussion. Although it's not technically AI, oftentimes we find it's helpful to include things like robotic process automation as part of the AI discussion, since the goals are so similar, and because robotic process automation is oftentimes a precursor to AI-based automation. But in general, at Alight, right, we think of all these things as AI. We encourage all of our clients to sort of adopt that as well and use that as a framework to then surface AI achievements to their leadership. And in general, our ambition personally, and hope this also comes through in this discussion, is we're here to serve our clients with market-leading AI capabilities. And we also want to be the trusted partner, obviously, in them adopting at scale generative AI HR use cases, which is where a lot of the focus is these days. So that's sort of our definition of AI. Let's start talking a little bit about like AI and HR. What are the use cases? What are we seeing, right? So as you're thinking about your HR strategies for how to adopt AI and HR, you sort of have a good sense for the playing field. If we go to the next slide, we'll see, the most important thing for these conversations that we found is always to start with, why are we doing this? Why do we even care about AI? The CEO cares about it is not the right answer, obviously. So when we think about AI, we always focus on three core objectives, right? Which is to create an excellent client-employee experience, or an excellent employee experience. Two is to empower our clients or the HR professionals to manage that employee experience and drive their particular HR outcomes. And lastly, to deliver high-quality ongoing service. And if you're an HR practitioner in a company, that probably also includes some effort to try to reduce costs as much as possible as well. So those are sort of the three reasons why we invest in HR, why we invest in AI within the HR context. And if we go to the next slide, we'll talk through sort of the categories of use cases. So there are sort of lots of ways you can apply AI within HR. They all tend to fall into these sort of four buckets, which I'll talk through now. And I'll give some examples of the outcomes that we see them driving when we apply them. Because again, it's incredibly important when you're dealing with AI to talk about not just having sprinkled some AI dust on top of something, but actually saying what's the outcome that it's driving, what's the incremental improvement we're seeing here as a result. So across these five different categories, right? AI and HR, the first one is personalization, right? Sometimes also called next best action. So these are a set of AI use cases around nudging folks towards a particular outcome via emails, via text messages, via other forms of communication, right? And where AI obviously comes in here is in enhancing the targeting and the effectiveness of those different nudges, right, towards the right outcomes. So, typically when we apply AI here, we're able to see at least a 10% lift in whatever the outcome is the client was trying to drive. So for example, it could be a campaign to increase folks to contribute more to their HSA accounts or contribute more to their 401k accounts. It could be personalized nudges so that the right folks are using diabetes care programs or other sort of wellness and well-being programs. So that's sort of the personalization category. And again, some of the outcomes that we see there when we apply AI effectively. The next category of AI use cases in HR are assistance categories. So this is making sure folks are getting to the right resource to answer whatever their question is, whether that's a piece of content on a digital property or getting to an agent or the right agent within a call center to answer their particular question. Some examples here are IVA or chatbots, as well as IVR, which is used to route folks within call centers to the right location. So as an example of some of the outcomes here, right, when we talk about our chatbot IVA capability that we deploy, it generally has a market-leading 95% correct intent detection rate, so it's very good at figuring out what someone's asking about. And it generally has a 90% positive response rate. So folks are usually pretty happy with the response that comes back. And it, together with other digital properties that our clients might put in place, generally is able to get a 90% call diversion rate, right? So you're sort of making sure that 90% of interactions folks have end up being digital versus going to a call center or to an HR business partner via a ticket. And this I'll sort of foreshadow a little bit. One of the places where we're very excited about generative AI, those 10% of responses that aren't satisfactory, right? We're very excited about generative AI to actually sort of move the needle and close the gap there. And we'll talk about that more in the next few slides. But that's sort of an example of chat and assistance technology that's AI based. Same for call centers, right? So IVR. In the past, you would use phone trees, right? Sort of press 1 for X, press 2 for Y. Now you can actually sort of speak and get right at the right agent. So that's another example of using AI to improve the employee experience within this assistance category. At the top here, we have recommendations. This is really AI used to help employees make confident decisions in complex circumstances. So one of our favorite examples here is using AI to help model out for employees what are their expected healthcare costs going to be in the coming year during the annual enrollment period, so they can then pick the right health plan for them based on what the right cost model looks like. This is an example. The AI is not very sophisticated, right? The modeling that's done here is really producing estimates for whatever the expected health event an employee is going to have in the next year. What do we believe is the cost, sort of at a zip code level, for where they are and the providers that they're looking at, right? So this is an example. It's not super sophisticated AI, but it's still modeling. You update it carefully, very slowly, but it's still a good sort of use case. And there again, we're able to drive usually about a $500 a year savings for employees that end up adopting the recommendation of a recommendation engine there. The last two categories of AI and HR are a little bit more sort of internal facing. One is insights, right? So how do you use AI to more quickly get insights from sort of what's going on with employees as they're using your services, as they're using your channels, right? So answering questions like, what are employees calling about? What are employees struggling with? What are they searching for? These are things now that involve lots of manual call listening, but which using AI, you can actually shorten those feedback loops much more quickly to understand where are their hotspots in the employee experience. So this is a place where I think, in call centers, AI has been used already for years to do just basic sentiment analysis. And we do that. We listen to millions of calls a year using AI because there aren't enough call center managers in the world to listen to all the calls you need to listen to do quality control and achieve things like a 95% positive interaction rate in the call center. But there's even more room to do things here, especially with generative AI. And that's one of the areas, again, foreshadowing a little bit, that I think we're seeing a lot of interest and excitement for what new generative AI technology can do here to give insights into what's happening in the employee experience. And then last is operations. So this is sort of really a set of capabilities to automate processes. One example here that I love is intelligent document processing. So instead of processing documents as part of various HR processes manually or sort of via offshore help, you can now deploy OCR and intelligent document processing engines to really accelerate the speed at which documents process. It produces much more reliable results, and for the employee experience, it also ends up happening much more quickly because you're no longer having to have a person look and read a document. A machine can do it, in mere seconds. So I'm going to pause there for a second. That's sort of the overview of all the different ways that you can use AI within the HR context. Those are the 5 categories. So as you're thinking about your HR strategies, ideally you're sort of at least considering looking at what is happening within each of those 5 categories within your particular HR context. If we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what does good versus great look like. So if you feel like you've already got one of these sort of a good strategy laid out, right, and you sort of are thinking about all of those 5 different categories of AI and HR, it's then good to start thinking about what does good versus great look like, right? Like what, we can make some incremental improvements to our chat functionality. We can make some incremental improvements to how we personalize, but what does actually sort of a leap forward look like? And here in conversations with clients, we have 3 big trends or ways that they're sort of creating a transition from good to great. The first of those is integrating generative AI into the capabilities, and we'll talk about that obviously in the next couple slides. But obviously there's a lot of interest in generative AI. The capabilities have really made a leap forward there over the last sort of year or two. So that's one thing to do, is integrate generative AI into your different AI capabilities and use cases. The second is investing in tying together all those use cases. Many times with clients, they'll have a chatbot system separate from a search system that's separate from a personalization system. They're all running fine by themselves, but tying those all together and being able to have them all speak with each other and therefore providing even more cohesive and also more, better outcomes is a major opportunity. And lastly is starting to bring in external data sets and large external data sets to inform the models that are used to make recommendations, choose next best actions, so that you're not just operating on your particular employee population, but can sort of tap into much broader data to, again, drive better outcomes for what your AI is trying to do in each of the various relevant use cases. On our side, we saw these. We ended up investing in and then launching our new AI engine called Alight LumenAI, which was announced a few weeks ago. That was meant to really capitalize on these three themes. But regardless of how you sort of end up capturing it, these are the three big ways that we see folks creating, sort of a real step change in what their AI is doing once they have sort of a baseline strategy and some baseline AI capabilities in place. If we go to the next slide, I'll dive in just a little bit into generative AI just because it's such a hot topic. And we've found it's sort of been very helpful to educate folks on how can they think about it, what it does, what it doesn't do, and then therefore, where should they be thinking about applying it. So anytime there's a new technology that comes along, you want to ask the question, well, what is it actually able to do differently than what we had before? And then you take that and apply that to your business and say, great, where can we tap into some of these new benefits? So when we think about generative AI, there are really three things that it's able to do differently than before: conversation, summarization, and content creation. Writing code is such a big use case that we sort of add that on as a fourth one, but it's part of content creation. But if anyone ever asks, like, what's the deal with generative AI? The answer is conversation, summarization, content creation, right? So generative AI is able to understand and respond to informally written questions and statements much better than prior AI systems, and also prior generative AI systems are able to do, right, with these new large language models. It's able to summarize large amounts of unstructured content and data much better than prior AI systems are able to do. And it's able to create content much better than prior AI systems were able to do, right? We sort of, for decades, AI technology that could do some basic stuff here, but large language models really moved us forward in a very major way on these capabilities. And so the question, of course, is great, conversation, summarization, content creation. Where should we be applying those new capabilities to further improve the employee experience? If we go to the next slide, I'll give sort of a flavor of where Alight is looking, right? Feel free to sort of take and steal this, obviously. But what I'll sort of, at a high level at least, say, I think where we see the most interest and excitement, and where we think also the biggest step changes are coming in the near term, are three areas. The first is IVA and chatbots. The second is insights creation. And the third is internal process automation enhancements. So those are the places where we're making the biggest investments around how we're transforming our existing capabilities with generative AI. And we see that as sort of a common theme across the landscape for companies that are trying to make that leap and starting to adopt generative AI technology on top of existing AI capabilities. If we go to the next slide, let's start talking a little bit about what it looks like to actually adopt these technologies, right? I think it's fine to say, great, here's our intention. We want to adopt these, 3 AI use cases. We want to launch them, but it's a little dicey, a little bit risky, right? So what does it take to actually be an AI intrapreneur and launch these things either as a product you're developing or sort of bringing these things into the employee experience? There are 5 really, really important things that you need to think about as you're considering and evaluating these use cases. This is from experience, both at Alight as well as previously, right? This sort of encapsulates the ways that AI initiatives go wrong. So the first is pick the right areas, right? So focus on a problem that AI can solve now, not a speculative future capability. This is especially important with the generative AI. The important thing here, right? Validate everything with small pilots, and also phone a friend. Don't trust the vendors. I say that as a vendor, right? But sort of, if you're like, hey, could AI solve this problem? Don't trust anybody with a commercial interest to say, yes, it absolutely could. Find a friend to phone, someone who's an engineer, someone technical who could sort of look at it with a critical eye and say, yeah, I think actually the current technology might be able to solve that as a problem. Or, are you seeing other folks solving it as a problem as well, and not just via press releases? There's lots of AI washing that goes on, right? But, phone a friend at another company where you saw a press release about some neat chatbot and say, hey, tell me more. How is it working? How's it going, et cetera, right? We're early in the hype cycle. So pick use cases that AI can actually solve. It sounds obvious, but again, don't find folks you can trust here to give you an honest read. The second is resourcing wisely. AI systems are very expensive to maintain and run, as we'll sort of see as we get across to some of the other points here. So really important things to think about is, is the AI system you're standing up meant to be as good as the market, or is it meant to be a real differentiator? If what you're trying to do is to be as good as the market and just sort of adopt market level technology, use a vendor, don't build something yourself. If you're trying to build something where you're saying, actually, this is going to be differentiated and this is going to be market leading, they need to resource it differently and build it using in-house talent, and not just, sort of pulling in contract talent that can then go away for a while, but you need people in-house internally who can build and maintain and understand how to build AI systems. Example I like to give is that call center technology. Call center technology is pretty standardized. There are lots of vendors that are producing it. You usually don't want to go your own way and build your own call center AI technology. You want to adopt it from a vendor. However, if there's something in employee experience, you're trying to be market leading, right? Other folks haven't tried this thing yet or haven't done it yet, then I think you really want to think about how do you build internal technical talent that can actually be dedicated towards building and maintaining this particular, AI system for your particular use case. The third point here is avoid high-risk AI use cases. It's kind of a sub of pick the right use case, but this is really important to think about, right? Which is all AI models produce mistakes sometimes, right? It's very important to be clear, what does bad output look like, right? Like, what does a bad model output look like? So personalization, as an example, you would say, listen, we sent someone the wrong email, right? Someone got an email that wasn't relevant for them about a program that wasn't relevant for them. That's a bad outcome, right? All models will make mistakes. You should only be pursuing AI use cases where you're comfortable with the consequences of those mistakes. I'm comfortable with someone getting an email that maybe was not, the best targeted towards them on an occasional basis, but there are some uses of AI that can be a bit higher risk, right? And oftentimes these come in for things like resume screening, performance management, right? So if you're using AI to assess someone's performance, that has some very real consequence. If the model gets that wrong, that is a very real human consequence, and you want to be ready and sort of think about if that's actually something that you want as the maintainer of this AI system to suddenly sort of have all of that responsibility and accountability for that bad consequence. This also sort of flows a little bit to the problem of bias, right? All models make mistakes, and when those mistakes concentrate in a certain subpopulation, that's bias. If you think your model hasn't found bias, it doesn't have bias, you just haven't found the right way to slice your data yet, right? Maybe it's not it doesn't have bias against certain protected populations, for example, but maybe it's got bias against folks with red hair and you just haven't checked yet, right? So all models make mistakes. All models have bias, you just haven't found it yet. And that's, again, why it's so important to only use AI in use cases where you're comfortable with the risks of bad outputs and you're comfortable that the biases that would be problematic for you are things you can check for and then sort of check exhaustively. This feeds into the last 2 points here. Keep humans in the loop, right? AI is not new intelligence, it's scaled intelligence. You have to have someone overseeing the AI systems and overseeing the outputs. I have seen systems many times go off the rails when someone says, we launched it, it's doing great, and then you come back 3 months later and say, great, who is it? Someone been watching and making sure the outputs are good? And they say, oh, I haven't been checking, I assumed it was fine. You check and it's never fine. You have to have a human in the loop. Data changes, models change, the outside environment changes. If there's not someone there watching, maintaining quality, it will go wrong, guaranteed. And so that means you have to think, sort of cost and budgeting wise about who's going to watch the system. You also, if you're building your own, have to think about how do we build tooling so that folks can actually watch, sort of make sure the system's working properly. Always design any of these projects with human in the loop first and foremost there, right? Again, this is scaled intelligence. So you're scaling that human in the loop's intelligence. It's not new intelligence or autonomous intelligence. And lastly, this is related as you have to measure extensively. You have to rigorously measure performance, error rates, biases, the business impact. You have to have those feedback loops. If not, right, you're sort of, again, just sprinkling very expensive AI dust on top of something if you're not actually thinking about what are the outcomes that this is really driving. This has so many implications on how you set up the algorithm, how you measure its performance, how do you set up experimentation to rigorously measure, using ideally things like control and treatment groups to see if the AI is having a positive impact. That measuring extensively and really thinking about that from the get-go is incredibly important to ensure the success of an AI initiative. So those are sort of the 5 different things that as an AI entrepreneur, you want to make sure you think about very crisply and clearly as you're considering different AI use cases. Again, whether that's adopting some vendor's technology to bring in-house, or you're trying to build your own technology for your employees, or maybe to surface externally. If you're thinking about those 5 things really carefully and critically, things won't go too off the rails as an AI entrepreneur. I'll go to the next slide and then sort of cover off, so and talk a little bit about what we see going forward, what we don't see going forward. So, I think a couple of this started to get at some of the myths. Immediate impact, right? I think last year there was this hype cycle around Gen AI and folks sort of thought, great, we'll download a chatbot and give it some documents. It's going to run loose and revolutionize our employee experience. This is a multi-year journey of test and learn with controls and governance in place. So, we don't see this as being sort of an immediate impact space. It's going to take time. We also don't see this as AI everywhere. right? I think this gets at one of the, AI systems are expensive to deploy. You need humans in the loop, et cetera. If you have one or two big AI initiatives in a year, that's a win. But I think last year there was this expectation of list all your business processes, check the box on which 20 of them we're going to use Gen AI to get better and faster, and then good, in 2024, we'll capture all the value in the savings. That's just not the reality, right? You may have some small stuff here and there, but one or two tent poles for the year in terms of what you're really delivering value-wise with real significant AI use cases is probably the bar to be hitting. And then the last thing is sort of generative AI takeover. The thought was generative AI everywhere. It's not the case. Classic AI still has lots of uses and use cases. Really important to keep in mind that it's not sort of just about Gen AI. And as you talk about your AI strategies, don't just think Gen AI, because that is a very sort of specific thing. You can get value out of other classic AI systems without having to go sort of full open AI on what you're trying to do. I have a quote there on the right, which I like to think about a little bit occasionally, right, which is good to remember in hype cycles. When light bulbs were first introduced in like the 1880s, there were farmers that for a while thought, great, we'll just leave light bulbs on in the fields, and corn is going to grow so wild and crazy it's going to have eternal growing seasons. That didn't come to pass, right? It's very hard to predict at the get-go how technology is going to evolve and in which dimensions it's going to sort of evolve quickly versus not quickly. So we're absolutely in an early part of this cycle. It's not just hype, there's real value here, but I think we're all sort of learning and adapting and seeing what's becoming reality versus what's becoming more challenging. If we skip forward to two more slides, I'll just cover quickly off. Next one, please, maybe slide 15. There we go, perfect. I just want to sort of come back quickly to some of the myths that we talked about before at the outset, and hopefully some of the context and the frameworks we gave help answer some of these questions. So again, right, so AI does not replace humans. It's scaled intelligence. You still need those humans in the loop. You need a surprising amount usually. And so AI is really there to augment humans. It doesn't eliminate the work, but it lets them sort of, do more of it at once, and then also lets sort of other folks end up focusing on higher value work. Part of that, of course, it has to be deployed with humans in the loop. We didn't get in this session to talk too much about data governance, ethical AI principles. Again, I think about the sort of the AI intrapreneur framework. You should be okay sort of following that, plus whatever your company's existing data security policies are. Again, right, sort of AI is not an instantaneous benefit. It's going to take a while to launch. And then again, sort of the success here is not about having tons and tons of AI use cases and showing the 20 places where you've deployed AI. One or two big tent poles is really what winning looks like here, because that's also sort of as much as you'll be able to do in terms of retraining humans to be in the loop and actually measuring the value that's coming out of it and talking about it and not having to be sort of an expensive project that again ends up being, as I like to say, AI dust sprinkle on top of things. So we've talked through this very quickly. It's a lot of content, I know. If we go forward one more slide, I'll close out and say thank you everyone for your time and attention here. I have time for a few questions that I'm looking here. So I have one question here that's a great one. In becoming an AI entrepreneur, what steps can we take to foster a culture within our organization that embraces and integrates AI technology seamlessly into daily operations? This one's a tricky one, right? And I think often the limiting factor that I've seen where we see a really attractive AI use case is how quickly do folks internalize and understand what AI is able to do? And you really sort of have to take an iterative approach. So in some cases, when we deployed AI, for example, internally at Alight, the team is already pretty technical. They get it. They say, great, here's this whole process we can re-engineer or that we can accelerate or produce better outcomes on. In other cases, the team really doesn't stand or takes time to understand what is generative AI able to do. In those cases, right, what we see is you oftentimes have to start very small, right? So we say, look, we think there's potential to use generative AI to re-engineer this whole process, but we're going to start with just a small step, and that's going to take a month, right? And we'll move slowly. And then once that small step happens, and I've been in these meetings literally where someone goes, oh, wait, we did this in this step. We can do the same thing in this step and this step and this step. You say, yes, amazing, right? And you sort of bootstrap and build iteratively. So I think that's often the name of the game, is understanding what is the level of AI comfort in the organization and familiarity, and how do you help folks sort of get juices flowing in an iterative way by showing them more and more and more what AI is able to do. And the last question I see here that we probably have time for is, considering the rapidly evolving nature of AI, how can we stay ahead of the curve in leveraging AI technologies to retain top talent? There's a lot there. The most important thing about sort of AI talent is that it's engineering talent, right? So if you have a great world-class engineer organization, you're going to have a great AI organization. If you do not have a good engineer organization, there's no sort of petri dish upon which to have sort of a great AI talent organization. So I think that's the most important thing there. And then lastly, how do we stay ahead of the curve? You can't, right? Even sort of AI researchers get surprised by new papers that are popping up. So I would say, be curious, maintain an open mind. And I'd also say, each organization has a different risk profile and tolerance in the space. Some folks want to be leading edge, others want to be more conservative. Both are okay, and it's okay for you to sort of state that as well and say, I want to go slower here, I want to go faster, right? Sort of be confident in the pace that your organization wants to take AI. Both sides of the spectrum are fine. Maintain an open mind and be curious, and that's the most important thing you can be doing besides reading the news occasionally and seeing what other companies are doing with AI. I think that's all we have time for today. I hope you found this session helpful. Reach out to Alight if you'd like to hear more, or like to talk more about what we're doing with our clients in the space. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick.
Well, thank you again, Geoffrey. That was a great thought leadership. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. As a reminder, please be sure to check out the prizes and raffle rules section to see how you can earn points for the chance to win one of several prizes. Our next session will begin after a short break at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be a thought leadership titled Beyond the BLS, Making a Business Case for TA, featuring another one of our sponsors, ICIMS. Please click on the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there.